Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel BNB Daily Spoiler. Steffy finally tells the truth. Rick exposes after learning about Taylor and Deacon forbidden love.
Raging Ridge is informed by Steffy about Taylor and Deacon's forbidden love. According to previews for The Bold and the Beautiful, Steffy Forrester Finnegan will divulge Taylor Hayes and Deacon Sharp's forbidden love to an enraged Ridge Forrester. Steffy will learn something during the week of February 2nd to 6th that is both upsetting and worrisome. Steffy will be completely fed up with the situation when she discovers that Taylor has disregarded all of her advice and fallen even more in love with Deacon. Steffy still won't understand why Taylor would take a risk like this considering Sheila Sharp's history. Steffy will be irritated because Taylor is seeking the husband of a very dangerous lady. Steffy will explain what would happen if Taylor doesn't listen to her after pressuring her to finally put an end to whatever is going on with Deacon. Taylor could risk being cut off from Steffy and the kids if she doesn't fulfill her daughter's orders this time around. Although Taylor may surrender to Steffy's demand, she'll only keep seeing Deacon behind Steffy's back. Deep down, Steffy might be terrified of that and quickly turn to Ridge for support. In the February 6th episode of BNB, Steffy will surprise Ridge by revealing that Deacon is more than just Taylor's buddy or patient. Ridge will learn that Deacon has affections for Taylor and that Taylor has feelings for Deacon. Of course, Ridge's response will presumably be to blame Deacon for everything. Taylor was alone and defenseless when Ridge dumped her for Brooke Logan Forrester. Therefore, Ridge may allege that Deacon took advantage of that. Since Ridge is also aware of Sheila's potential, he will comprehend Steffy's anxiety. Deacon's the one who took a gamble by marrying someone as messed up as Sheila, so Ridge will think Deacon should live with that choice and keep away from Taylor. Ridge has never been a big fan of Deacon anyhow, so he may start talking about how Taylor deserves better. Ridge is no longer Taylor's romantic interest, but it doesn't stop him from understanding the situation and acting. It's likely that Ridge will soon corner Deacon for a furious altercation and issue a severe warning to Taylor. According to previews for The Bold and the Beautiful, Ridge will receive some enraging information from Steffy. It will be interesting to watch how he responds to this. B&B, is Taylor Hayes a hypocrite? After years of condemning Brooke, she is now doing worse. Sheila Carter thinks Taylor is salvaging her marriage after Taylor Hayes kissed and proclaimed her love to Deacon Sharp. After years of condemning Brooke Logan, is Taylor the real hypocrite? Taylor Hayes had always liked to think of herself as the moral compass of Los Angeles. This wasn't because she thought she was more holy than anyone else, but rather because she had dedicated her life to measuring people's chaotic imprecision and trying to piece them back together. As a mother and friend, she valued order over disorder. And as a psychologist, she understood the language of second chances. She had been so vocal about Brooke Logan's decisions for years because of this. Brooke's name had become shorthand in Taylor's sermons, private and public, for what could happen when impulsive passion outran thought. Taylor had paid close attention to Brooke's loud and frequent displays of affection, offering insightful advice at community fundraisers, dissecting the drama on panels throughout the day, and in private settings, wrapping her worry in the clinical tone of a woman seeking to save someone from themselves. She had warned anybody who would listen that Brooke's relationships were not role models because they were too ostentatious, too performative, harmful to kids, and risky for families. Taylor said those things because she thought that if people learned to control their cravings, suffering might be prevented. However, as virtue frequently does, the words hardened into an armor that concealed the person inside. As a result, Taylor's response was prompt and meticulously staged when a rumor started to circulate through the Forrester halls, small, insignificant, and eventually growing fangs. At a fundraiser, she informed a small group of coworkers, "There's a line. We owe it to the vulnerable to call out reckless patterns." Her face lit up in a pleasing way as cameras warmed. With exact citations ready, she arranged her indignation like a scholar curates a paper. People took her word for it. In more private moments, she recognized that was a sedative as well as a blessing. It enabled her to conduct good deeds, such as referrals for treatment, community speeches, and sessions with at-risk teenagers, and to go to sleep at night with the conviction that she had created a moral framework beneath a precarious metropolis. It wasn't until she found herself crossing a boundary that she had consistently denounced that she began to question whether she had ever used judgment as a tool rather than a guide. It started out as a little personal panic rather than a lofty goal. Tender and cautious, Taylor's connection with Deacon had not been made public for very long. Deacon had already been painted by the world as a repeat criminal who had regrettably changed in some areas but was untrustworthy in others. Taylor recognized the danger of being seen with him. She had argued, to herself, that their tie deserved nuance, that atonement is the labor of 1,000 modest gestures. But when a whisper arrived from a corner of town, an unidentified site promising exclusive proof that Taylor's affection belonged to a manipulative, dangerous exile, she felt something stir in her chest that was not totally protective. It was terror. Furthermore, fear has the power to transform even the most noble intentions into defensive traps. She could have answered in the one honest way she believed in, with truth. She might have gone to the press with Deacon by her side. Let people see a man whose past had been horrible and whose present was painstaking. She may have relied on the public to reach a more comprehensive conclusion. Instead, she did something she had spent a career advocating against. Taylor called a former co-worker who owed her favors and was still receptive because she had previously assisted him during a crisis at work. Just a quiet rumor to curb the narrative was the simple request she made, but it would turn sour overnight. The strategy was simple. Release a manufactured article that Brooke, not Deacon, was the target of scandal. Taylor reasoned that if the rumor got big enough, the cameras would follow Brooke's shadow and the gaps in her own romantic life would remain uninteresting and unexplored. Planning a controversy as though it were a civic intervention is conceited. Taylor assured herself that she was defending the guy she loved and her family. She convinced herself she was utilizing the instruments of her trade, knowledge, influence, networks, to avert harm. The language of prevention turned into a mask to keep the hunger under control. In the middle of the night, she persuaded herself that instead of betraying a principle, she had redeployed it. She would divert the wolves instead of destroying Brooke. One of those stories that starts as a disgruntled murmur about a dress fitting and develops into a moral critique by the second dessert was the initial leak, which came from a rumor at a charity luncheon. The whisper spread. Brooke has been spotted with a man who isn't her husband. There's a picture, supposedly, said a blogger who was eager to get clicks. An unnamed source, Taylor's source, fed a few of facts that had, at best, the thinnest resemblance to the reality. The social media wheels churned like hungry millstones. As Taylor had planned, Brooke's life, which had always been spent in the spotlight with a startling lack of regret, descended into turmoil. Like Tinder, headlines appeared. The woman Taylor had publicly denounced for years was now at the center of a scandal that turned her private life into a commodity, as designers contacted and magazine editors requested quotations. At first, Taylor watched from a distance, confident she'd done the right thing. The ends justified the methods, she assured herself. She reasoned that if Brooke were preoccupied and the cameras were focusing on other subjects, Deacon may avoid the icy scrutiny of public life long enough for the truth. Deacon's modest deeds of loyalty and his unobtrusive charitable work to forge a new story. She convinced herself this was stewardship, not cruelty. In this instance, she told herself, judgment was therapeutic. However, the spin developed a life of its own. The rumor gained traction in addition to being inflammatory. An innuendo and a detail were added here and there by Brooke's former adversary, who was hurt and opportunistic. A resentful paparazzo published a photoshopped image. The narrative shifted like quicksand. It was no longer the fun mock judgment Taylor intended, but an unpleasant, public conviction stripping Brooke of dignity. Steffy called Taylor in a voice that cut like cold glass. "What did you do?" she asked. Not yet a demand, but the tremor of someone whose world was tilting. Taylor was the first to lie, the automatic lie of those who have spent too much time disguising themselves as righteous. "I had nothing to do with it," she added. I'm just as shocked as everyone else. Finn, on the other hand, refused to let it go because he was the type of man who lives in the tiny spaces of reality. He applied pressure. The moral detective in him sensed the difference between surprised and contrived. Taylor's answers began to tangle like thread on a spool. A child's question in the background of a phone conversation, a friend's disappointed silence. Guilt did not strike as a sudden thunderclap, but rather as a tiny, ongoing ache. It became an item she carried, like keys in a pocket, there but not startling. Then, as always, Brooke responded with full-throated dignity and rage. She organized a tiny news conference because in a world that would convict you in public, silence is consent. She spoke about privacy and the agony of rumor, words she'd heard Taylor employ as a cudgel for years. The hypocrisy of Brooke's use of the same words that Taylor had used wounded Taylor to the quick. The public enjoyed the moment, a drama of moral mirroring. When the truth finally breached, because truth, patient and relentless, has a way of driving a crack in every facade, Taylor's world disintegrated into a succession of admissions. Guilt-ridden and inebriated with regret, a subordinate public relations representative spontaneously told an inquisitive producer that a preferred source had been feeding the blog. The source's notes led to Taylor's phone number via a series of emails and chats, creating a breadcrumb trail that investigators who prefer to retain receipts enjoy following. For the first time in a long time, Taylor's argumentative shield that had protected her for decades was taken away from her when she was confronted with her behavior. Standing in the Forrester parlor with Brooke across from her, brooch glistening, stance impeccably offended, Taylor felt every word she had ever flung soften into cooperation. "You condemned me for years," Brooke continued, the voice that had been accused of vanity now the voice of someone who had seen her hypocrisy reflected back on the accuser. "You lecture me about choices and consequences. And now, you're hiding a lie to keep something you care about safe. Taylor, what makes you superior to me?" Taylor wanted to answer with the experienced warmth of an expert who understands how to deflect grief. Rather, she found herself enumerating petty, self-centered, and human reasons. Fear of witnessing Deacon insulted once more, fear of losing the person she had chosen to start a new life with, and a personal conviction that a little deceit could outweigh public harshness. It didn't feel like defense at all. It felt like confession. "What I did was wrong," Taylor murmured finally, and the statement was sure enough to be true. "I thought I could save someone by redirecting attention. I believed that the results would make it worthwhile." "You used other people as a shield," Brooke remarked, the grief in her voice laced atop rage. "You played public opinion like a scalpel." The reaction was fast and terrible. The community, always hungry for both scandal and penance, devoured Taylor's apologies with just the mix of curiosity and derision the town adores. Her lectures were canceled. The nonprofit boards that had relied on her stability withdrew. People who had previously trusted her professional judgment questioned if her own moral compass had ever pointed in the right direction, both out loud and in private. Taylor's work life suffered in ways she had never foreseen as a serious possibility. But what crushed her worse than job bruises was the private cost. Deacon, who had stuck by her in better and worse, felt betrayed by the technique, if not the cause. "We promised honesty," he informed her one night, voice low and quivering. "If we build a life together, it has to be on the ground, not on a pack of lies." Taylor's fury at herself took the character of stubborn repair. She apologized publicly, in a press appearance that lacked the rehearsed grace of prior instances. In order to explain the psychology of crises and the anxiety that drove her, she offered to sit with anyone who requested it. She conducted seminars on public life ethics. The tiniest compensation she could think of was giving money back to struggling bloggers. She volunteered for groups that assisted those who were susceptible to the harmful effects of gossip. She made a valiant effort to carry out the work that her profession had always advocated. However, the town's moral architecture had changed. The people who cherished her the most, those who respected her tough discipline and dominating intellect, could do nothing except watch while she adjusted the damage she had created. Brooke, who had earlier been the subject of her judgments, astonished everyone by taking a hard, somewhat Christ-like route. She accepted Taylor's apologies publicly, but made clear that forgiveness had to be earned. The harshest and truest lesson hit in the peaceful hours. Alone, Taylor would replay the lessons she had previously given with a child's conviction and experience the shame of the lady who taught virtue with a hidden ledger of compromise. She had denounced a pattern in someone else's life, and then indulged in a worse version in her own. The conflict between one's private shortcomings and one's public persona is the worst kind of hypocrisy, not the act itself. She was mistaken to think she was immune to such an impact. Time, as it tends to in soapland and in life, softens some edge of the scandal. The town moves on, therefore people had to forgive. With smaller panels, fewer headlines, and more truthful work, Taylor rebuilt a modest professional existence. For a while, Deacon stayed with her, teaching them both the delicate skill of re-establishing confidence. Brooke continued to work, to love as she always had, and to be the object of both tenderness and contempt despite having survived greater storms. The Globe carried out its custom of hiding scandals under the headlines of the following season. However, the deeper moral tremor persisted. Taylor, who had once thought of herself as an arbiter of right and wrong, learned what many people come to learn: that good intentions can be poisonous when wrapped around expediency, that the voice of judgment can become a cloak for cowardly choices, and that the only real redemption is the patient labor of repairing what you have broken. In the end, there was no theatrical confession, no movie scene reconciliation. There was something quieter, Taylor showing up to a small community center to talk honestly about the devastation of gossip, hands shaking as she realized she'd been wrong. With the current in one hand and an old version of herself in the other, Brooke observed from the rear with an unreadable face. They were both women recognized, far from saints. Each of them had committed errors the size of pebbles and mountains. What they did now was crucial, painfully and irrevocably. We need people who will own their mistakes. A woman in the crowd who had lost her life to gossip years before rose up as Taylor concluded her speech. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Without flinching or charm, Taylor nodded. She declared, "Then I will own them. Not in a vacuum. Not in camera-framed words. I will take responsibility for my job, the individuals I assist, and the commitments I make." There wasn't enough applause to feel comforting, but there was a slow, secret nod from Brooke in the back of the room, and Taylor felt the ground of her life shift the tiniest fraction towards something like repair. Hypocrisy is a human fault. The human remedy, if any exists, is a tireless, sometimes lonely resolve to change. As life in Los Angeles progressed, as it always does, Taylor Hayes, who had previously condemned Brooke for years, learned the hard math of becoming the kind of person you once demanded others be: responsible, repentant, and ultimately, if slowly, redeemed.